So thanks again to Replay for inviting me on today. Obviously, what we're going to cover is maintenance of existing floodlighting, traditional metal halide, halogen, etc., and the switch to LED. So as I said, my name is Lewis Quayle. I work for Power Plus Group in the Sports Lighting Division. I'm the Business Development Manager and take on a technical role to work with clubs, partners, and anybody really to help them with their sports lighting needs. Who are Power Plus Group? We started off as an electrical contractor. Our head office is in Nottingham, but we work all over Europe. So we have specialist teams such as sports lighting. And we also work in the horticultural sector. And at the moment, we are incredibly busy all across Europe with projects in Holland, Denmark. And this year, for example, some highlight projects. We worked with Nottingham Forest Football Club, Moscow Lighting to upgrade their floodlights there at the City Ground to Premier League standards. We worked with the Motorpoint Arena National Ice Centre for an LED upgrade ahead of the Ice Hockey World Championships. And alongside that, we work with a lot of schools, colleges, local authorities, and grassroots village clubs of all shapes and sizes, really, to help them with lighting needs, whether that be maintenance of existing systems or whether that be on their journey to LED lighting. And what will we cover? Pretty much as you'd expect. I'm going to talk about maintenance of existing systems, give you some information as to what's happening there and what my recommendations and advice would be, and then the switch to LED, the benefits of that, and give you some information around it. Applications of uses of lighting. Again, within sporting governing bodies, we see a lot of figures, facts, etc., around lighting and the benefits, the additional use, hours, etc. Particularly now as we're well into October and we've got the clock change at the end of the month. Darker nights are fast upon us, and to continue the playing sport, continue the revenue for those of you that are operating a facility, it's paramount, obviously, that we've got functional lighting working across our sports facilities. Types of floodlighting. So the most common floodlighting we see within sports is metal halide. That's made up of halogen, and again we typically see that to be the majority on high mass columns for artificial pitches, football, rugby, hockey, but also tennis, where columns tend to be a bit lower, perhaps fixed as well. But yeah, as I say, the main type of floodlighting we see is metal halide. That gives us a consistent colour, typically, tends to have a higher lifespan. But on the flip side, the lamps tend to be more expensive than sun lamps, for example, which you may find with other types of floodlights. And also sun lamps don't typically tend to keep their colour as well. The colour consistency is not as great, and neither is the lifespan. But on the flip side, they're cheaper to maintain. Regulations and compliance. So depending what your facility covers, which sports particularly, you'll find that the governing body, so for example, within football, we've got the Football Association or the Football Foundation. If we're looking at an artificial solution, perhaps you've had that funded in the past, or an artificial system been put together on that basis. They will always specify lighting requirements, typically lux levels, which is illuminance measured per square meter, and uniformity. That can be the minimum to maximum ratio or the minimum over the average. Those are important things that must be considered with lighting to ensure that we're safe, we're compliant, we've got good coverage. That's going to allow good visibility. But in addition to the governing bodies, we have organisations like CIBSE and the Health and Safety Executive, who again specify minimum lighting levels they expect to see per application. So it's important to know what they are, what they look like, and important to understand how your facility complies to them. That can be arranged by a simple light test by a contractor. Maintenance. So if you're on a metal halide system or other traditional methods of floodlighting, then it's keen to understand the maintenance requirements. That can be specified by the manufacturer. So when you've had a product installed, you should have an O&M manual or data sheets for those products. they will give an idea as to what kind of maintenance should be done to upkeep and increase the longevity of those products, whether it's the floodlights or the columns, the masts themselves. On the flip side, well then lamps don't last forever, as I'm sure the majority of you know. So components such as the lamp, starters, igniters, ballast, capacitors, they will fail over time and need replacing. So it's important to keep that up to date, keep them in working order, and have them maintained by an inspection. So we'll cover a bit further details around that. Advanced technologies, as things are moving on, the majority of you will know about LED lighting, and again, we're going to cover it a lot today. But the benefits certainly outweigh the cost and the implementation of LED. And I think we more and more now we're seeing clubs making this transition for many reasons. One, the energy efficiency. We're talking about maintenance and how that can be costly, how that can be regular, particularly when it comes to component changes, but also those components themselves that I mentioned before, they're being phased out. The manufacturers aren't making them as regularly. They may be made just to order. We're finding that a number of them require import from Europe or further afield, Asia, predominantly for components. We see a lot of, and therefore the cost is rising. So when we see facilities and we work with facilities that have a number of lamps out or are having control gear issues, quite often that can be a big step towards moving to LED. One, to rectify and get that system in good working order, but two, for all the additional benefits that come with it. And when you've got a hefty maintenance requirement or a big bill potentially for getting your metal halide or traditional system back in working order, actually it's just a big way towards the transition to LED. Component legislation, I mentioned obviously that the manufacturers are slowing down the production of these. On one side, that's due to the fact that there's just not so much of a demand anymore, because traditionally when lamps are failing or other components or control gear, clubs and facilities are making that transition to LED. They've, over the last few years, decided it's something they want to do. Particularly, we see it a lot in tennis where there's such regular play most evenings perhaps, and as soon as members have played a match at another facility that have LED, somebody else's club, or they've visited somewhere socially, we just see that demand that when they come back to their own club, it goes to the committee, and other members really want to make that transition just due to the superior quality of LED and what can be done with it. But I mentioned around the component legislation because you'll see with other types of lighting, T5, T8 technology, that the government are phasing these types of technology out. That's due to many reasons. One, sustainability. We find certain types of gases can be used in certain types of lamps, and they're just not sustainable. They're not eco-friendly, and in 2023 and beyond, it's certainly not the direction that we want to be taking. We're trying to be more sustainable as a country and across the as a planet. So a lot of these components just aren't being made anymore. They're being phased out, and legislation is permitting them from being manufactured going forward. So it is a problem, and it is going to be a problem. The solution is that we have LED options available that are readily available now on the market, and that will be the transition, whether it be full upgrades, or we've also worked with clubs and facilities on a short-term basis as well to see whether it just be actually, they've got 16 floodlights, but 3 of them are out, not quite ready or in a position to move forward yet. But at the time, they've just replaced those so that they've got lighting in working order, and that's something we can assist with. It's not the permanent fix, but sometimes it just is that solution, and I think we're going to see more of it when these technologies just aren't going to be available anymore. I'm going to talk about maintenance requirements for existing systems. I mentioned before about manufacturer recommendations, so it's important to know what that product requires. Particularly, I think this is more for, I say, newer systems. If we've got a floodlighting system in that's 20, 30 years old, perhaps you're not going to have that documentation to hand, understand that perhaps that product may no longer be available, that manufacturer may no longer be trading. Sometimes that can be the case, often not, but it may be difficult to find that out. But for those newer systems, and when I say newer, I'm talking around the kind of 10 years, maybe 15 or under that, then we'd expect those products to be still around. We'd expect the manufacturer to be able to give advice as to what maintenance should be done to that product to keep it in good working order. Again, I'll talk about planned preventive maintenance against reactive maintenance as well. Governing body. I'm going to talk about certain things that have to be done. So we're talking about electrical products when we're talking about floodlights. So I've detailed it on here, but your generally ICR testing is a requirement, has to be done. Depending on how you operate, what type of venue you are, will dictate how often that has to be done. But it's certainly something we need to understand the legislation that applies to your facility or applies to your club, and ensure that we're compliant with that and keeping records. The ILPs, the Institution of Lighting Professionals, they give certain advice. This is more relevant to lighting columns, lighting masts, but around how often we should be having those inspected, tested, particularly for the structure. If we're talking about a football, rugby, or mugger facility where those columns may be 15 meters high, and especially for sports such as hockey, where there's a higher lighting level, and we'll find ourselves with quite a number of floodlights, potentially quite a lot of weight at the top of those masts. It's critical, and it's important to understand the structural integrity, that is safe, it is serviced. We do understand that is in a position to be able to maintain that weight safely, so that they're not gonna come down, they're not gonna fall and cause us any safety issues. So there's recommendation and guidance given by the ILP with regards to how often we should have certain things within masts, poles, etc., inspected. But if you know that, or you haven't had those tests in serviced, it's definitely worth reaching out to investigate that, because, as I say, the ramifications, if it's not safe, if they're not right, could be critical. So it's key to understand that. Planned preventative maintenance is critical, really. We find a lot of schools, a lot of colleges, the type of organisations will work regularly with us and other parties. It's not just that kind of sector. We do work with a lot of private clubs as well, independent, who will have a regular maintenance contract. Perhaps that may be an annual service and an investigation. You'll find with floodlights, particularly metal halide, that a number of them can get quite dirty. They can get quite weathered, and actually just cleaning them will give off such an increase in light level to where it should be. LEDs are a little bit different. Manufacturers will still recommend that they're cleaned, but it is something in the production of LED sports lighting that has been considered, that traditionally the glass on metal halide floodlights can get quite dirty, quite weathered, and that is causing a light loss level, which, particularly if your design for your system, for your club, is quite tight or closer to where it should be, then any impact like that is going to be negative and is going to reduce the light level on the field. So it's things like that can assist, but also we come across a lot of systems that haven't been maintained. They can become rusted, they can become weathered. We find nuts, bolts, screws, etc. May need tightening. That could be for safety. So all around, really, we'd certainly recommend an annual inspection of your floodlighting to ensure that, one, it's safe, but two, that we're getting the maximum benefit from it. We see so many systems where they haven't been maintained, they haven't been inspected, and actually that will come on to my next point, which is reactive maintenance. And that's where we find that you can be hit with increased costs. There can be bigger challenges because you have then a system that's not working, it's not performing, and because it's not been maintained, actually the challenges can be greater from there. I was with a club last night that have looked to relamp to increase their light levels to meet the guidance from their governing body and their league. And whilst they've tried to relamp, a number of the luminaires are just so corroded that they haven't been able to gain access to them to relamp. So despite having the components available, which were in shortage anyway and have cost them quite a lot of money to obtain, they haven't actually been able to do that, and it hasn't been positive in terms of the results they've achieved, and they've now got further maintenance to do as a response to that. So certainly something to do from there. Reactive maintenance, it's always something that is key to have context for, to understand who offers this service, and to have somebody that specialises within it. There's no end of local electricians and electrical contractors that will be able to assist you, but actually with sports lighting systems, we tend to see the same ones, the same products, the same luminaires, columns, etc., around different facilities and different clubs. So it may well be for raising lower columns, by example, that contractors will tend to carry the lowering equipment for them. Again, that can save costs of access equipment, cherry pickers, so on. But also a familiarity with the products can be very key to understand and actually make sure that that reactive maintenance is carried out correctly, effectively, and is going to get that system back and working for you as it should do and should be. I mentioned before about EICR, electrical inspection condition reports. That's a legal requirement, particularly for facilities that are operating to the public, and they need to be carried out either every 3 years or every 5 years, depending on how you operate, how you trade, and who has access to the facility. So it's something we find often gets missed, particularly for facilities where they may be a clubhouse or it may be a leisure centre, a council facility, so on. Typically, they do tend to be tested, and there may be some kind of contract in place for that, for the building itself. But we find quite often that the floodlights get missed because they might be on a separate distribution board or a different system. But it's key and it's critical to have that carried out, to understand that it is safe, and particularly when we're talking about electrics and we're talking about wiring, cabling, etc. If it's not safe and it's not right, the outcomes of that can be very severe. So it's key to get that done, and particularly when we're talking around the kind of timescales. I mentioned it maybe 3 or 5 years, and I mentioned before about the ILP with lighting columns recommending every 5 years. Then that being a timescale to have columns checked. A lot of these maintenance requirements, or a lot of these things you should be carrying out as part of your maintenance regimes, actually timescale wise can fall in quite nicely. So you can often find that getting a package from a specialist contractor for all of these items is perhaps a more cost-effective way of doing it as well. So certainly explore service contracts or similar with a contractor. I mentioned before about component bans and shortages. We've got a shortage because they're just not manufactured as regularly. They're not as used. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could find these locally on a shelf at an electrical wholesaler. Now that's just not the case. We get lucky with some of them. Some of the manufacturers keep stock or work with lamp companies, for example, that do. But there's some products we just can't get hold of, and we get so many inquiries for, can you get us 2 of this particular lamp, or do you have this ballast, this igniter, for example? And unfortunately, sometimes we just don't. It's the same brands and the same part codes and model numbers that we get asked for so regularly that they may be the ones that just aren't manufactured or are made to order. That may be a 12, 16 week waiting time for it to come from China or somewhere similar. And in that time, you've just got downtime of your system, which is potentially making it unsafe, is potentially then a disservice or a disadvantage to your members or your end customer. And we see it so often. It's just can lead to loss of revenues, can lead to loss of opportunity, and also critically, we're talking about safety. When if we've got fixtures out, we've got lamps out, or luminaires not working as they should, then actually we can end up with dark patches. And from a health and safety perspective, that's certainly something we want to avoid when we're talking about ball sports in particular, where fast moving balls such as hockey, tennis, etc. We certainly don't want to be facing a fast moving object if you can't see it and don't have good visibility of it. Benefits of LED lighting. This could be a presentation on its own, and I could talk to you for days about it. And it's every manufacturer is going this way. the fact that it's just become an industry in its own. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry globally, and there's a genuine reason why. So I'll give you a few kind of the key tips and the key highlights for sports lighting in particularly. Energy efficiency. If we're talking about tennis, or we're talking about artificial pitches, multi-use, by example, then we just see so much in terms of usage, the cost. It's no secret, and we're fully aware of how expensive energy is becoming, and that's only going one way. When these things go up, they don't tend to come back down. We all know that, and we all understand that. So whilst we're in this predicament, this energy crisis that has been labelled over the last couple of years, that's just added so many costs to clubs, to facilities that just aren't sustainable. So we're finding a lot of clubs, a lot of facilities making this transition to LED because the energy efficiency is so much better. You can find higher lumen output, so that's how much lighter a luminaire is distributing for a fraction of the power consumption. And if you think about your home, think about your office, your premises, and quite often now it's not uncommon to go somewhere. It's the norm to have LED as opposed to the opposite. You know, 5 years ago, be looking at facility and thinking, oh, these have LED. They've made that transition. Now, anywhere you go, particularly where you find higher usage, motorway service stations, for example, or long anywhere where we're seeing more regular use of lighting, just the benefits there are so outweighed. Typically, you'll find on a product around a 50% saving, but when we're talking about sports floodlighting, the technologies are so advanced now and only continue to go in that way that, by example, traditionally you may have 20 floodlights lighting a hockey pitch. We may be able to do that as few as with 12 floodlights, by example. So not only are the products more efficient on their own, but actually what we can get from them and what we can benefit from them are just so much better in that sense anyway. So there's genuine cost savings to be had on energy alone. Component maintenance savings. So LED luminaires don't use lamps, they don't use igniters, starters, capacitors, and instead of ballasts, we're looking at LED drivers. That's essentially your power supply. So what we're taking power from into the driver, that's what's allowing that luminaire to illuminate. So in terms of the cost that we spoke about before in maintenance, in terms of swapping lamps, igniters, and those other components and control gear, that's completely eliminated when we come to LED. So we find some clubs and some facilities, they're spending thousands of pounds a year replacing these components of control gear. So there's significant savings to be made there when transitioning to LED. And plus, when these can be 8, 10, 15 meters in the air, it's costly to get cherry pickers, scissor lifts, etc. So we're avoiding that need if we are on static columns. Enhanced performance. So if you've played at another facility that has LED lighting already, or you've seen it, you will notice just the significant increase in quality. We're more consistent in colour. The colour rendering is far superior. We could be consistent in terms of performance, minimal depreciation. And generally speaking, we're able to be more directional, and that's a column I've got, a tab I've got on its own. But in terms of what we're looking to achieve is to light your playing area. Whereas with traditional floodlighting, we can find it that the distribution is so wide or so outspread that we're shining light everywhere and hoping some of it kind of gets to the core, and it does, but actually let's use less energy, be more directional, and let's light the playing area, which is what we want to do. It's task lighting, and let's use it as that. Consistency and reliability. So one, reliability, we've spoken about the control gear and the components that aren't there as will fail. So not only do we have that, but we have rated life. We're talking about power supply when we're talking about drivers. So every product will have a rating, and that will tell us how many hours that driver should perform to, and also that product. We can understand in what's called lumens maintenance ratio. So how long that product will perform, how many hours, until it will give a certain percentage of its life. That's important because on a lighting design, we use what's called a maintenance factor. So if we are basing that on 0.8, for example, 0.9, typically figures you will see on lighting designs, or 0.95, depending on how often the facility is used. That is telling us that after so much depreciation, so if it's 80, if we're using 0.8, that's telling us what at 80% that luminaire, that design will perform to. So you'll be able to then work that out and calculate that over how many hours you use your facility for and use your floodlights as to what the design life of that is. And that's critical because that's just something we've never seen before with metal halide. Yes, there's been the maintenance factor there, but just the consistency, the reliability of the products just isn't there. And that's why we find it so often that when light tests are carried out on metal halide, and especially with some floodlighting and other types of floodlights, we just don't see that consistency and that reliability. So often they can fail a light test when actually you spent a lot of money initially putting in a system that you're hoping would be consistent and reliable, and unfortunately it just hasn't been. So with LED, we get that consistency, we get that reliability and that understanding. So it's peace of mind that once you've made that transition, it should be the last you've got to think about it really, apart from some general maintenance and requirements. Instant off and on, particularly for facilities that operate on a lettings basis. Schools, colleges do this a lot. Council facilities where may have somebody with a 30-minute booking, 8 p.m, and then actually their next booking is 9 p.m. We find with metal halide floodlighting, we've got a warm-up period, but then also a cool-down period as well. With LED, that's just not required. We're instant on, off and on. So that gives us great benefit in terms of when we're operating a facility like that, or tennis, by example, where slots are booked, or matches, you're not having to leave them on for the entire time. If nobody's on that court, nobody's on that pitch, it can be turned off and then it can be turned back on when it's required, without that need to turn them off, have the cool down period, and then turn them back on and have a warm up period. And where we've got that, we see a lot of clubs that are just turning them on at the beginning of the night, letting them warm up and wait until the end of the night. And that's only adding to your energy consumption, and of course taking away rated life because you're using the product. Improved directional control. I mentioned this above, but we're looking to light the field, we're looking to light the playing area. That becomes beneficial if we're in residential areas, for example. Regularly I speak to clubs or speak to facilities and they have challenges with neighbours, or they have challenges with light spill, light pollution. We can be more directional, more controlled, and as I say, we want to get all of that light onto the field, onto the playing area to give the best playing experience. So we've got more optics, more options that come within LED luminaires to allow that. Lighting controls, so particularly for multi-use games areas, or artificial pitches that get used for a bit of everything, or for multiple sports. Different sports have different light level requirements, and I mentioned this briefly earlier. But what the added benefit then of lighting controls is for example, if you've got hockey, which typically we might find a 350 lux requirement, but then we've got football training, which could be as low as 120. If you've got lighting controls, we can allow dimming, so we can retrofit that wirelessly, or again, there's wired systems that can be put in, and it just gives us more flexibility into what can be done. So if actually we've got a facility where there's a hockey booking once a week, or once an evening, but there's others that but the main use is football, then actually we can have different settings to allow us to change that, so that we're not consuming more energy when we don't need to. The retrofit process. So I want to talk a little bit about this because a lot of clubs, a lot of facilities think this might be stressful, might be challenging, might be a long-term process, and actually the reality is it's not. So we start off with consultancy. So it's getting to understand you, getting to understand your club, your facility, what it's used for, how often it's used, what's important, what your current lighting looks like, how it performs, so that we can build up a really good picture, and that will allow us into a lighting design phase. So we'll produce a lighting design that will take measurements from your facility, column heights, etc., and we will produce a design that shows us what product we're going to use, how that's going to operate, what light level that's going to offer, light spill, etc., that we mentioned before, particularly for areas where we're finding residential. And then we can produce that to you to show you what exactly kind of what you'd be signing up for, what that looks like, and make sure that that's compliant to your requirements. Planning permission, it's a question I get asked regularly. Do we need planning permission for a retrofit? It depends. Sometimes the answer is yes. If that is the case, it's not to worry, because we will often be able to be more controlled, as we mentioned on the previous slide, more directional with light. So if we've got less light spill, less light pollution, typically then a local authority is going to see that as a benefit. Plus, with the transition that the government are wanting us to make in moving to LED and moving away from halogen and fluorescent technologies, incandescent and other lamp types that we see, then this is certainly something they're going to try and support us with if they can. So we have the understanding of requirements. We know the framework that planning authorities work to. We understand the IOP guidance that we mentioned before on a previous slide, and we can obviously produce the design, as we said above, to show that compliance, put that to the local authority for you, almost as your agent, and get that planning permission approved. Alternatively, if you we can work with the local authority, sometimes a simple email or a letter explaining what you're proposing to do. They may permit you to do that without planning. So it all depends on your existing planning permission, what's specified, what's noted. But if you do need planning, it's certainly not a hindrance in most cases, and we can support you with that. Funding and finance, this is something we understand. We work with funders. We try to keep an eye on what is available, and we work with finance providers on the same side. So it's a very common question that we get asked about funding, about finance, and we're certainly in a position to help you with that. So once you understand what your project looks like, how much it costs, the timescales that you're looking to implement, and where financially you sit as an organisation or as a club, then we'll be in a position to advise you on any funding streams or finance to make that project a reality, and assist with that all the way through the process. Installation. So typically we try and get these done as quick as possible. We work with you as a facility to understand your schedule, your timescales, how this works, the quieter periods, busier periods, tennis, for example, or where you may have multiple courts. We can look at segregated working. So we will work on courts 1 and 2 today. That means you can play on 3 and 4, etc. Similar kinds of things like that. For a football pitch, rugby pitch, hockey pitch, where kind of on your 6 or 8 number mast typical solutions, we're talking under a week start to finish for an installation process, and we'll work with you for that to make that as stress-free as possible. Handovers, hybrid systems, for example, a cut-off time each day. If you still want to use the lights that evening, we can work around that and make that a reality for you. Testing and commissioning. It's important, one, that once we've carried out an upgrade, that we know that it's electrically tested, to be issued with a test certificate upon completion. But also we're going to light test that, because we produced the lighting design. We mentioned about the requirements from the governing bodies, from organisations like CIBSE, and we need to ensure to you that, one, that you've got what you paid for, and that it complies to them. So you've got that evidence to provide to your governing body, to provide to your league, etc. So that's all part of the process, and that's carried out. Handover. It's important, obviously, to demonstrate how that system operates. If we mentioned lighting controls before, so if we've changed controls, then that's certainly something we need to explain, need to demonstrate, and understand that your volunteers, your committee, your staff understand how that system works. But quite often, actually, we can keep to existing switching, and there's not really a lot to show or demonstrate. So try and make it easy from that process, really. And then maintenance. We're significantly reducing the maintenance requirements by components, control gear, etc., as we mentioned, but there's certain things that still need to be carried out. So we can discuss that with you and issue you an O&M manual, and that will dictate and detail what kind of needs to be done, how often it does, and again, you get the full support there from thereafter as to having that carried out.